So we'll talk a little bit about how do you verify the install here. So after you install the connector, you can check the status of the services. There's two services. You can check those independently, or there's a single kind of catch-all that will check the status on both services. And I'll show you that in a second here. You can also look in CA Performance Center in the Health Status pane. So you can see in my little screenshot here, you can check the status of the OI connector directly in CAPC. And then you can also issue some queries directly against Elastic if you're curious whether data is flowing. Sometimes that's going right to Elastic via some simple queries is one way to do that as well. And then these are some simple queries that will show whether the indices have been delivered to the platform, and even do an inventory. This first query will do an inventory query against Elastic on the CAPM inventory. We'll look at each of the indices that get delivered in later slides. So some troubleshooting here. Are both services running? So the first thing, if I saw that the health status in CAPC or if it's not working properly, I would make sure that both services are up and running. There's a question that came in very relevant to this, which is if we only have CAPM, no ADA or NFA, do we need to run the agent service? And the answer is no. It wouldn't really consume much by way of resources, because without those data sources, the connector wouldn't even communicate with it. So it would be, you know, a process that wasn't really doing much. So I wouldn't expect it to have any kind of performance impact, the fact that it was running, but you could certainly decide not to run it in that scenario. The nice thing is, though, if ADA and NFA got added to the mix, if the agent was already there, then the next time you restarted the connector, it would automatically pick up and start working. So it might be a benefit to keeping it just for that scenario if you think that ADA and NFA might come into the mix at some point in the future. I would also check whether the health status in CAPC is green. And then I would also check whether the DOI platform is running. And a couple of quick simple things would be just to hit the Jarvis host and Elastic host that can show kind of just, let me share and show a couple things here. First of all, the system health status in CAPC. So I could look at the OI connector and see that it's normal, and it's the date and time that it was last polled, just check its status. If I were to hit the Elastic, just the root Elastic port, you know, I would get a response, something back that looked like this. Say, okay, well, I know that at least Elastic is up. I could hit Jarvis's port and see that that was up. So at least kind of some root level status to make sure at least everything's running. I would look at the seed group and inventory group, and I would make sure it had what I thought they had. You know, if I wasn't seeing inventory items going into DOI, or I wasn't seeing what I thought, I would make sure that those groups had the right inventory in them. Next, I would look at the logs. So the OI connector has quite a bit of logging, and both services in the connector. And so I would look in the log files there, and I'll show you where those are. I would also look on the Jarvis side at its ingest and verifier logs to make sure, you know, if I didn't see any errors on the connector side, you know, things like connectivity with Jarvis or you know, errors with CAPC REST calls or that sort of thing in the logs, then I would suspect that perhaps the data, when it was being sent to Jarvis, that was being dropped or thrown out by Jarvis for for some reason. And so I would look in the Jarvis logs, and I'll show you those in a second here. Obviously, can enable debug level logging and restart the connector and the agent to run with debug level logging, and some instructions on how to do that. Standard log for J on the connector install. And so I would do that. Trace level logging will actually also show the payloads that are being sent. I would not recommend running for any amount of time with trace, just because those logs can get quite big rather fast. But if you need to see the actual payload that's being sent to Jarvis or back and forth with PC REST calls, you can turn on trace level and see that. Let me jump in and show, let's show some of where these log files are. So here I am on the CAPC host where the connector is also installed. And in my opt.ca, I have the OI connector installation. And so this is the root folder here. If I go in the logs folder, you'll see the OI connector log. That's the core connector log service. You would see things like inventory errors, event errors, any connectivity with Jarvis errors in here. The OI agent logs would be NFA ADA, so anything related to sending ADA NFA metric data to the platform would show up in the OI agent logs. If I look at the OI connector log, you'll see when various tasks fire, how long things are taking, how many metrics, how many inventory items are being sent each poll cycle, that sort of thing. So if I needed to increase the log levels to say debug level, I would go in the configuration folder, which is, again, I'm in the root of the OI connector install. There's a conf folder, and in here are all the various things you would use to configure the connector, and obviously the log for J is where I would configure the connector log. So look up, and I would change the kind of the info levels to debug in here. Trace level will get you, as I mentioned, trace level will get you the actual payloads themselves that are being sent, but usually debug is more than enough to start diving into things that are less obvious from just errors in the log. And then to turn on debug info in the agent log, you would edit the agent wrapper config, and there's a line in there that's commented out that has some support, the support flag, and if you uncomment that, then you will start getting debug logging. So some specific symptoms now of various problems that you may or may not see, but just how I would go about debugging some of these things. So if I was missing inventory in the DOI platform, I would check that how much inventory is in my inventory group. We know that at scale kind of above 5,000, things like CAPC REST performance or ingestion rates and things could cause inventory to get dropped. So I would check the inventory count, try to keep it below the 5,000 mark. I would edit the seed group to reduce the inventory, at least temporarily, to see if this is related to the problem. I would decrease the inventory in the seed group to scope things down a little bit, make sure things are working properly at a lower scale.